Thanks for joining us on 9 News Plus. I'm Chris Bianchi. The Supreme Court on June 15th voted to keep the 1978 Indian Child Welfare Act in place, which gives preference to Native American families in foster care and adoptions. Some Republican-led states and white families argued that the act was based on race, while tribal leaders backed this as a way to keep and preserve families and culture. Joining us with more about this decisive 7-2 Supreme Court ruling and the impacts it can and could have is Lucille Echohawk, the interim executive director at the Denver Indian Family Resource Center in, of course, Denver. First of all, Lucille, thanks so much for taking the time to join us here today on 9 News Plus.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
It's obviously a very important topic. I want to get your insight on this for sure. But first of all, what was your initial reaction when you first saw the Supreme Court's decision?
Tremendous relief, as we feared the very worst, and absolute joy that this important piece of federal legislation had been confirmed and left in place in its entirety.
Were you surprised by the margin as well, the fact that it was a 7-2 margin?
Yes, absolutely. I think I wasn't the only one in Indian country. We all were overjoyed at the strength of that decision. Most federal Indian law cases that come before the Supreme Court are usually 5-4, one way or the other. But to have a 7-2 margin was just not expected at all. And most of us, or many of us, credit Justice Gorsuch for really working to teach other members of our highest court about federal Indian law and its importance to the first peoples of this land.
And I do want to kind of get into Justice Gorsuch specifically here on the next few minutes. But Lucille, could you give us a bit of a broad overview about how the Indian Child Welfare Act helps tribes maintain culture, how exactly it works, and why this was so important to you?
Well, the premise of the act is to keep Native American families together, if at all possible. We certainly want children to be safe, but ideally they're safest among family, and that can be either with birth family or extended family. And Native definitions of family are much more expansive than non-Native communities often practice. The genesis of the act itself came about because the tribal nations of the U.S. were losing so many of their children to foster and adoption by non-Native people. Prior to the passage of this act in 1978, there was extensive research and outreach to Indian country done at the time to try to get a handle on just how bad things were, and they were very bad. And through the leadership of then Senator Averest of South Dakota, and what was then, I think it was called the Select Committee in the U.S. Senate, they pulled together this act and got it passed. And Indian country has been grateful. The downside of the act is it doesn't have what we call teeth in it. It's about states' public child welfare systems complying with this federal act, but there are no consequences if they don't. And so through the years, a lot of this has been about creating awareness and partnering with entities like the Denver Indian Family Resource Center. That's part of the reason we were formed, is to be a resource to the state and counties here in Colorado to work more closely with tribal families to keep them intact with, of course, safe children as in the process.
What would you say has been the overall impact of the act here in Colorado and across the West? You mentioned that there's not a ton of teeth within it. So what has the overall impact been from it?
Well, a lot of it, as I said, is about creating awareness and working in collaboration and partnership. And that's what the Denver Indian Family Resource Center does here in Colorado. And we have other collaborative partners in the Native community here because we're a large, quote, urban Native population. But in my 41 years living here in Colorado, I have seen unbelievable progress by the state of Colorado. I served on or have served and still do on the Colorado Court Improvement Project. And they've always, in my tenure with them, had a particular interest in helping courts better become aware of this act and the importance of observing it in their rulings. And also, we now have in Colorado, I don't know that many other states do this as well, a statewide ICWA training it's mandatory for supervisors and open to all public child welfare caseworkers. And I serve on what they call the resource panel that answers questions and whatnot for the caseworkers who participate.
Well, very interesting there. And Lucille, I kind of want to get into maybe how this may look moving forward. So obviously this act now being upheld by the Supreme Court, what does that mean for this movement maybe moving forward? Does much change, or is it sort of status quo, or are there more things that you can do because this act was upheld?
I think there's a lot more that can be done because of the publicity and awareness about the importance of this federal act of our country, and also in fear that it would be struck down by the United States Supreme Court. Many states, including Colorado, sought to codify parts or all of the act into state law. And here in Colorado, I'm very proud of our state that we codified the whole thing plus the 2016 regulations. And so we've got both now to work with going forward, plus the publicity that this act has received in this case. And I'm also hoping that many more tribes will become much more involved with the public child welfare system that's holding their children to be more active. They don't have how shall I say it, the responsibility is on states because they have the children and families. But I think tribes also can be much more engaged. And Colorado is also fortunate. We have 2 ICWA courts that are specifically there for these cases in Denver and in Adams County. And they make special point to reach out to tribes and get them involved in the cases to bring about, hopefully, positive results. And so I think many good things can come from this outcome. And we're certainly going to work really hard here at the Denver Indian Family Resource Center to be that support and partner to counties to continue to do a good job for the Native children and families that become part of the system, or in our case, that are in danger of being involved in the public system.
Lucille, another kind of important point, and you mentioned this at the beginning, Colorado native Neil Gorsuch, who of course sits on the Supreme Court, one of the 9 justices, and he was appointed first by Donald Trump back in 2017 to the Supreme Court. You mentioned the role that he's had in specifically Native American issues. What has his role, in your view, been, and what impact has that had on the Supreme Court as a whole, and perhaps even in this specific decision?
Well, I think, I just reading his concurring, I forget what they call it. I'm not a lawyer.
The opinion, yeah, he wrote I think he wrote the majority opinion, yes.
Yes, I think Amy Bryant, I can't remember her name, but anyway, she wrote the lead opinion, but Neil Gorsuch, I think, did the education in the court. In the many years he served on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals here in Colorado, he heard a lot of Indian tribal cases and really took all of that experience to heart and took it with him when he was nominated for the United States Supreme Court. And I don't believe any other justice has had that kind of experience and background. But we in Indian country are so gratified that he, embraced it and has used it to educate our highest court in the land, and that speaks volumes for tribal sovereignty, and in this case, the well-being of our children and families.
Certainly a big impact. I suppose from the broad standing of the act being upheld as a whole, anything else, Lucille, that we've missed that you think we should mention within this?
I think you've covered it all, and we're just joyful that the decision has finally come forward, and we couldn't have asked for a better outcome. The vote was just music to our ears, and will cause us all to work harder and hopefully smarter going forward.
Well, Lucille Echohawk, interim director from the, we appreciate a few minutes of your time here. And I should mention, by the way, the interim executive director at the Denver Indian Family Resource Center. I appreciate a few minutes of your time here on 90s Plus. And thanks so much for joining us and lending us your expertise and your insight.
You're quite welcome. And thank you for having me again.